I'm going to focus on the commercialization plan, which is a key element of the phase 2 application, as well as, of course, fast tracks and direct to phase 2s, and then what we call traditional phase 2s, which is once you have your phase 1, then you apply for phase 2. Before I forget, thanks to BHI for putting together this incredible event. Thanks Judy and Jordan and everyone involved on your side in making this happen. So you've heard from Saroj earlier today about what we have going on at NIA. Just to give you some framework, here's our team at NIA. This is the team that I lead at the National Institute on Aging. Our office has both responsibility for overseeing all of the extramural career development and training opportunities, as well as the small business opportunities, which I'll focus on today. So our office, in terms of small business, has 6 main functions. First, we coordinate the program across the scientific divisions. There's 4 scientific divisions at NIA. Guidance to applicants, outreach, funding, networking, and entrepreneurship. And just to give an example of what I mean by networking, I mean, there's the partnering initiatives and things that you heard of, but we also work really strategically with external stakeholders to figure out how we can bring all the different resources together to get you through and to each value inflection point. And one example of that, for companies in the Alzheimer's drug and diagnostic space, we work with the ADDF, the Alzheimer's Drug Discovery Foundation, which is essentially a venture philanthropist, to help you get from that phase 1 to phase 2. So if you're in phase 1, SBIR, you can actually get additional funding from ADDF to bridge you to the phase 2. So while you're applying for the phase 2 and trying to collect more data, they will sponsor that part of the effort, and then we will then fund your phase 2. So just exciting things going on there. And this just shows you for the NIA kind of where we are. And for those of you that don't know, we've been in a period of unprecedented growth within the government and the NIH. In 2015, we were the 12th largest institute at an SBIR budget of $34 million. This year, we are going to be above 130 million, about 132 million, and now the 3rd largest institute. So as we get into the focus of this talk, remember, I'm going to really be talking about 5 programs, essentially, in terms of your commercialization plan. So Deepa talked about the phase 1. We won't talk about that at all, but we'll talk about that commercialization plan, which is part of your phase 2, is part of a fast track, is part of a direct to phase 2, is part of a commercialization readiness pilot application, and is part of the phase 2B. So just so you know, if you are interested in NIA, these are our funding opportunities. We have the Omnibus, which is investigator initiated. And then we have what I like to call the unofficial Omnibus for Alzheimer's disease. Anything related to Alzheimer's disease can go to that FOA. And if you do apply for that FOA, you'll notice that the budget limits are higher, assuming that you meet one of the waiver categories. And just a reminder that if you already have a phase 2, you should consider 2 programs, the phase 2B, as well as the commercialization readiness pilot program, which is a new program, the CRP. 2 key things about the CRP. One is that it does not have those restrictions on what % of the budget can be outsourced. And it is actually meant to fund things that are not pure research. So, you know, technical assistance, you can pay for your regulatory consultants, late stage activities, manufacturing, market access research, and you can subcontract all of that through the CRP. And this just lists the CRP funding opportunities. And then also we really have a focus on diversity, and we'll see many programs come out over the next year from our office with a diversity focus. One of the programs that is currently in place is the Diversity Supplement Program, where we set aside a significant amount of capital for those companies already funded by us, if they want to bring in a diverse candidate to add to the research plan and to their team and help that diverse candidate accelerate their career, then we will provide additional funding for that. So just contact our office if that's something of interest and you're already funded by us. So just a reminder in terms of budgets, remember to look at the waivers, look at what each institute's budget limits are. Remember to request the 7% fee. That is the only time you'll be able to request money from NIH and not have to explain what you're doing with it. And really important to pay for things that the NIH wouldn't normally pay for. And then remember that, we talk about these limits for phase 2, it's 50% of the cost, at least 50% of the cost must go to the small business, but that can include some fee for service work at CROs. And if you have specific questions about that, definitely get in touch with whichever IC. Now, this is specific to NIA. Every IC interprets it differently. So definitely get in touch with whichever IC you are interested in applying to. And then technical assistance, this is relatively new. For phase 2s, which I'm focusing on, you can actually ask for $50,000 for technical assistance costs, like expertise, but like product sales, IP protection, market research, reimbursement consultants, regulatory consultants, etc. You actually put that in your application in F, other direct costs, lines 8 to 10. So definitely encourage. I know that these types of assistance is critical at the stage of development that all of you are at. So I really encourage every company to actually take advantage and request those $50,000. And for the NIA, at least, we do not count that as part of your budget limit. So if it's a $2.5 million budget limit for phase 2, it's $2.5 million plus the $50,000 for technical assistance. So I'm now going to hop into the developing the commercialization plan. So I mentioned already that this is, not just for what you think of as phase 2s, which are the phase 1 follow-on phase 2s, but also directed phase 2s, fast tracks, phase 2Bs, and CRPs. Maximum of 12 pages. There are instructions in the application guide, and read the funding opportunity for additional programmatic requirements. So remember, as Deepa pointed to, you need to have a product. We need to be able to understand the product. And if you got through phase 1, then you likely were able to show us what that product was. The commercialization plan then takes it the next step to say, how are you going to actually commercialize the product? The most important thing in writing your commercialization plan and how we look at it is not to prove that you have it all figured out. We understand, especially if you're on the, remember, there's a range. Some companies in phase 2 are still pretty early, while some companies in phase 2 may be, already in the clinic or close to commercialization. For the companies that are earlier, especially, we don't expect you to have it all worked out. What we want to see is that you know what you need to find out, and you know what you don't know, and you know how to fill those gaps. So, if you don't have the, a super strong business team yet, but you're early in development, that's okay, as long as you're able to show in your commercialization plan that you recognize what gaps are missing and that you have a plan to fill those gaps as you get closer to commercialization. So when you first sit down, think about the 5 C's per Harvard Business School. The customer needs, the company skills, competition, the collaborators, and the context. And now I'll get into the specifics here. So in terms of how is it reviewed and how does it affect your score, it contributes primarily to the significance criterion in terms of peer review, but it really affects all of the, or most of the different peer review criteria. One of the most important things when I'm looking at a commercialization plan is, do I think it will change the paradigm? Now, so let's say it's something that, like a drug, where it will be in the clinic. Will it change the clinical paradigm? What we don't necessarily get as excited about is something where we don't know once it gets commercialized if people would use it and if it would actually change the way care is being done or research is being done if it's a research tool. So that's a really important thing to be able to demonstrate at a high level. Remember, for each FOA, there could be specific scoring criteria, so definitely look at the FOA. Talk to the program officers, the program contacts for each FOA. Do not, remember that this does not replace the research strategy. So you still have the research strategy. to explain the research plans for the phase 2 or whatever application it is. And then there's the other criteria. So the commercialization plan per the application guide has 7 key topic areas, and I'll go into each one of these. So first, value of project, expected outcomes, and impact. So here is really all about the value proposition. And what is the value proposition? It's what is the competitive advantage and why does it matter? And remember both parts of that sentence. So definitely you want to address that in this first section. You want to be able to show that, again, you understand the hurdles that you're going to encounter, but you have a plan to address such hurdles. In this, it's really helpful if you can do some sort of timeline, like a product development plan that includes key milestones. You can also combine this with the last section in terms of financing, and actually combine the product development timeline with the financing timeline. And then, you know, again, the goal is to demonstrate an understanding of the development pathway. Even if you're not going to be, if you realize that, okay, this is a drug and your company is not going to be the one that's going to get it all the way through the clinic, you're still going to need to understand what those steps are, and you need to show that you understand what those steps are. So the second topic area in the commercialization plan, so subsection, is the company. You want to show what the unique capabilities of the company are. Of course, this is where you want to talk about the team. And remember, the team is not just who's on payroll and who you're asking for salary support for in your application, but it's also, you know, leadership, boards, both informal boards like your scientific advisory board, your business advisory board, as well as legal boards like the board of directors, and all other advisors and consultants. And then your corporate objectives. What's the goal of the company in terms of how does it want to grow? And again, the key is articulating a clear vision. So the third section is market, customers, and competition. So first, in terms of market, you want to really talk about 2 things. You want to be able to show that you understand what the market is, and then what's your plan on addressing that market? Are there specific niches within that market that you're going to go after? So in this example, you know, what are you supplementing something? Are you replacing something? Because that'll tell you your market right there. Or is it something where there is nothing on the market? And then your market share may be wider. If part of market, you want to try to estimate sales revenues, especially if you're later stage in development. And you can do that by calculating forward, looking at the number of patients, again, what subset of that market would it address, and then do that calculation. You can also actually do it. So here's an example of doing it forwards, but you can also actually do it backwards, where you look at what other products existing on the market, what are those sales, and then you can use that to extrapolate what your sales may be. And of course, you know, when people do these projections, they would expect that the first year it hits the market, sales would be pretty low. As it starts to penetrate that market over a period of a few years, the sales would continue to go up. And then another part of this subsection is customers. There's really potentially 3 parts of that, which is patients, physicians, and payers. So in terms of patients, make sure you show that you understand the stages of disease and where your specific product, if applicable, is going to address that disease. You know, what stages would it be applicable? How many patients have the disease? What % in each stage, special characteristics, and the same for diagnostics. In terms of physicians and payers, you know, they're the company. If it's a drug or diagnostic, something where a physician would have to refer you for or prescribe you for, then they become a customer too. And show that you understand who are those customers. Is it a specialist? Is it a primary care? How do they work? What's their business model? How does this fit into their business model? And then competition, we addressed a little bit previously, but again here it's important to show that understanding of competitive landscape Strengths and weaknesses are things that are on the market as well as things that are in development. So if you're developing, let's say, a drug against a specific target and you're in the preclinical phase, and there's a drug already in a phase 1 clinical trial addressing that same market from a different company, it will be critical for you to explain what your advantage over theirs is, because even though they're not yet on the market, they're at least a couple years ahead of you. So you'll have to show that there is something better about your drug than theirs, at least potentially better, to understand why we would fund something when there's already a similar product a couple years ahead in development. And it's really helpful to have one of these competitive advantage charts. So definitely consider making one of these for your commercialization plan. In terms of trying to come up with who the competition is, there are several tools you can use. In terms of primary tools, there's of course customer discovery. If you are in a phase 1, you're able to do ICOR, one of the other entrepreneurial training programs with a customer discovery component. You'll be able to get some of that, and that's really helpful. In the past, there were these niche assessment program reports. We actually now, I think you should have heard earlier, just launched a needs assessment program. And that would be a great, that would really help identify some of this as well, and a good starting point. Secondary tools, that you can look through company press releases, patent databases. There's several industry databases, such as Global Data, or PitchBook, or several more. Clinical trial databases, FDA approvals, trade journals, disease advocacy groups can be really helpful in this. So definitely consider all that. And the last one to mention, which I'll talk about later, is the reporter database. So if you just Google NIH Project Reporter, there you can see who your competition for NIH funding is, at least in terms of the companies that got awarded. So again, if you're developing something addressing a specific target, it's worth going into Reporter and see if we already funded someone to address that target. Because if we did, then again, we're going to expect to see a rationale for why yours may be a potentially better approach. So in number 4, subsection 4 is intellectual property protection. So, it can be mostly patents, but sometimes it can incorporate trade secrets, copyrights, etc. You want to list all the patents covering the product and describe the claims. Who owns the patents becomes very important. If it's not the company, it's really helpful if you can show that that there is an ability and negotiation to license, especially like if it's an academic institution. A letter talking about that arrangement, a letter of support, can be really helpful. Wouldn't officially be part of the commercialization plan. It would be one of your letters of support, but you can reference it as part of the commercialization plan. How will you protect project-related inventions? How will you expand patent coverage after the project period? And other options for commercial exclusivity. There's no hard requirement that you have to have a patent when you apply for phase 2. That being said, I've seen time and again where reviewers do raise concern if you don't have a patent when you apply for phase 2. So if you at least have provisionals in, that can assuage some of that concern. But if you don't have patents, it's really important to explain why. And, if there are commercial reasons why it makes sense for you to wait, then explain that. Also, as part of that, you'll want to show that you will be able to get that IP. So, if your lawyers have done, freedom to operate analyses and other IP analyses, and that's why you're waiting, having a letter from those lawyers explaining that becomes really critical. So next is the finance plan. How much funding will be needed to develop the product? Again, this is where I talked about you can tie it to that Gantt chart. Cost to achieve the milestones. How do you plan to secure the required funding? And then again, letters of support, not officially part of your 12-page commercialization plan, but you can reference them within the commercialization plan. If you have letters from potential investors that say that they were not ready to invest just yet, but if you are able to achieve the milestones, that you put forth in this grant, that they are seriously going to consider an investment. A letter like that can really help in your application and in your competitiveness. So because it really adds meat to that finance plan and show it's not just a plan on paper, but there's some legs behind it. Production and marketing plan, this becomes a hard part of the commercialization plan for many companies if you are really early, because it might not be clear how you're going to produce and market. And that's okay, as long as you can explain that you understand the general tenets here. You'll want to, consider and describe what are your resources when it comes down to a production and marketing plan, and those can be both internal and external, again, including letters of support. There are often two ways to think about production and marketing. One is the external path of, you'll get to a certain stage and then you'll license it. And it's okay if that's your plan to say that. Of course, the more meat you can put behind it, like why you think that you'll be able to get that licensor at whatever stage you say that they will license becomes really important. So it's not just oh, I hope at some point, someone's just going to magically license, but to show, okay, in relevant fields, when they got to this stage, let's say phase 2 clinical trial for, the disease I'm addressing, there was, companies are actively licensing these types of therapeutics, and because mine's first in class, it will be, enticing to potential partners. So adding that meat to it, so it's not more, showing it's more than just hope, it becomes really important. And there are very different types of partnerships. Sometimes it's a complete handoff, and sometimes it can be really a collaborative effort. And then there's also the internal path. And here you're doing in-house development. You would own a lot more share of the overall revenues, but your cost would also be higher. And between these two paths, it's not critical to, it's not like one path is better than the other, but whichever one you choose, make sure you explain kind of how it will work for your company. And if you're not sure, you can explain kind of, here's what will help us make that decision. So we don't know if we're going to go, how far we're going to go with this. We might license early, but this data, these discussions later on will be pivotal in making that decision. So you show that you understand that you'll have to make the decision, and you have actually a process in how you're going to come up with that decision. That can work as well. Again, it's thoughtfulness that we really want to see in that commercialization plan. And then the revenue stream. How will you or the licensor generate revenues if the product is successful? That can include direct sales, contracting revenues, licensing revenues, and joint ventures. So we have 5 minutes left. I do want to say that if you were not funded on the first try, join the club. Most applicants are not funded on the first try with a specific application. So even though I'm talking about phase 2s, even for phase 2s, most companies are not successful with their first phase 2. So, it's really helpful to then take that review, think about it thoughtfully, and use that opportunity to address the concerns and to resubmit. With the phase 2, you do get that one chance of resubmission. I definitely encourage, before you resubmit, draft that one-page response to the reviewer concerns and send that to the program officer, and actually request a call where you can get the program officer to weigh in on if they think you're addressing the concerns. And they've seen this a lot more, and they likely will have some really good guidance for you. So several applications. Many of you may be familiar, great resource is the NIAID sample SBIR applications. We actually have been working to create some National Institute on Aging sample applications and summary statements that go with those applications. We have one that I linked to here, but there are a few more that will be available in the next several weeks. So definitely keep a lookout for those. And we're developing ones in more the device, digital health, areas where there is less coverage from the NIAID applications. And then we'll eventually do some like an Alzheimer's disease drug and diagnostic sample application. I mentioned the reporter database, and then there's some specific NIA animal model databases that are often helpful. So feel free to connect with us, and I look forward to your questions.
Hey, Todd, thank you very much. Very informative. You got a couple shout outs on the chat saying it, thanking you for your insights. I did not ask you before whether or not you're able to share those slides, but we've had that request, or a partial version. Okay, that's great, because it's certainly an outline and a great how to do it.
Right? I'll send those to you, Judy.
Okay, great. So to the attendees interested, you got a great crash course, and you didn't have to go to Harvard Business School to get those 5 C's. Hey, I did not get to ask this question at the end of the last presentation, and I think it can apply to phase 1 and phase 2, and you would know the answer. Someone asked whether or not program officers have authority to waive or increase budget caps.
So we don't have authority to kind of officially give you approval before you submit an application. However, the program staff put in the FOAs what budget caps we will consider. So this becomes very confusing. I'm glad you asked it. So remember, like for phase 1, as an example, the official SBA cap is around $255,000, give or take. Many other institutes, in fact, the majority of the institutes, will allow you to go over that $255,000 for specific topics where we already have a waiver covered with the SBA. And that waiver package, if you look at the current omnibus, and it'll be refreshed every year, covers a wide variety of life science related research where we know that this type of research is more expensive, and because this type of research is more expensive, carries higher costs, we do have a waiver from the SBA for these topics. So things like developing drugs, or anything clinical, and many others are really all covered. So that in the funding opportunity announcement, there will be a link to the waiver topics, and there's a good chance that what you're doing, if you need more money, there's a good chance that we did get a waiver for it and it will be covered, and then you can use that. But it's, program officer doesn't officially tell you, okay, you could go to a higher budget, but you use the waiver opportunities to do that.
And you addressed how most phase 2s aren't awarded initially, similar to many phase 1s. I had a question about how competitive the process is. Is it true that program officers would have a conversation with you in advance to see if your preliminary data is sufficient to make the phase 2 bar?
Yes, I mean, and sometimes you have to request that, so it's not a formal part of the process where the program officer will reach out to you for that. But if you take the initiative and you ask the program officer to discuss the results in your phase 1 and get guidance on a phase 2, they will be happy to have that discussion.
And you talked about the importance of competition, IP, and similar to seeking dilutive investment, management team, all those criteria. Do your team of reviewers do due diligence on the application beyond what is submitted, or does it have to stand on its face, and that's why you keep that emphasizing be thorough and back it up?
Yeah, and that's a key difference, is that per the review process, they can only look at the application in front of them. So it really has to stand by itself. If there's one of the things that often comes up, if an application doesn't get a great score because they don't put any of the key preliminary data that they have in their application, they just reference publications. Well, the reviewers are not required to look at all of your references. They're only required to look at the data that you put within that, for phase 2, that 12-page research strategy. So really critical that you focus on what's in the application. Now, after review, that's where you get your score. And for many institutes, especially for phase 2s, we primarily will base a funding decision on your score, but we also, for several institutes, including NIA, we have the ability to consider things that might be slightly lower in score, or technically higher, the way the scoring system works. But there are some reasons that maybe weren't reflected in the review that would make that application really important to fund, and we can consider that. But you have to be close to wherever scoring cutoffs are.